Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
This is Adam.
And this is Steve.
And today we're going to give our hot take on a game we just finished playing, Power Grid. But before we jump into a description of the game, I want to share a little information. I posted a survey on Twitter about a week ago. This is about board game collection sizes, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on the results from this. So what I posted is that I keep around 50 board games in my collection. It stresses me out they don't all get played regularly, so I rotate stuff out as new stuff comes in. And I asked, what size collection brings you joy? So here are the options that I gave to our Twitter followers. I said less than 25, 25 to 100, 100 to 200, or 200 plus. What category do you guys fit into?
I saw this poll. I thought it was super fascinating to see, and then the results were pretty interesting. I have just over 50 board games in my collection, and I think I want to keep it. I think a max of 50 is about right for me, because that's about all I'll ever get played, and I think that's at least one for every occasion that I can think of, and more than that will start to stress me out. So what about you, Steve? Are you counting them? It looks like you're counting them up right now.
I was looking over my shoulder there. I think I would guess I'd have to open the drawers to count all the smaller games, but probably right around 25. So I don't know if it's slightly under or slightly over, but right around 25.
Okay, that's what I would have guessed for you. So I'm going to give you guys the results here, and then I want to hear your thoughts on these results, but I also want to read what some of our followers posted about their own answers. Now, there were 38 people responded here, so 38 votes. Less than 25, 0%. Maybe not too surprising. I mean, the people that are following us are board game
hobbyists.
People that are board game hobbyists, right? So that's not too surprising. In the 25 to 100 category, that was 39%, so that was pretty good. 100 to 200 was only 21%, though. So that leaves the rest, another 39%, sitting at 200 plus games in their collection.
That's like Die Hard to me. That's like a hardcore, like a library.
For sure. Masters of the universe.
So that didn't fall out where I expected it to be. I thought there'd be more. I thought there'd be a few less than 25 at least. And I thought there'd be more at the 100 to 200. 200 plus that's a lot of games. Yeah, that would be hard for me to deal with, the idea that all those games are sitting there not getting played. What do you guys think about that? Do you think you could? Do you think that a 200 plus collection would make you happy? Would you enjoy having that many games in your house?
I like the idea, but what I've basically decided is that I don't get to play the games I have anyway. Like, I have 25 games about. I probably played 3 in the last month in person. I've played poker, I've played online, I've played video games, but actual, sit down and play board games with people. And that will change, I'm sure, soon. But, it still leaves me 24 more board games to play. What am I going to do to 100? That's all I'm saying. That's a lot of games.
For me, I can see the collector kind of side of it. Oh, that game is cool, or it has this interesting facet to it, so I want to add that to my library of games. And for the people who enjoy actually collecting, I can see that. But I'm the same with you, Steve. I want to be able to get these games out and play them. And if I don't think there's a game that I'm going to get out and play, I'm not going to buy it. At least I say that, and I have probably 30 that I've never played out of the 50 or so that I have. So I don't know. That's how I feel about it. And if I had some sort of a giant mansion in an underground vault and unlimited resources where I could stash these things, I could walk through and just reminisce about the times that I bought these games and played them. Maybe I would start going into mega collection mode. But no, I'm happy with my 50 thing. I feel like anything more than that would stress me out. What about you, Tim? What's your thoughts on a giant collection?
Just to break in real quick, just to qualify my answer, I live in a tiny apartment right now. When I lived in a house, I had 50 to 75 games, but
okay.
So I had to decide what am I gonna pare down in terms of what am I likely to play, what am I gonna play, how much space am I, of a small apartment you can
proportionate to square footage.
Oh, definitely, for sure. Yeah, I would have unlimited games with unlimited square footage. So.
I have 3,800 square feet of house that I live in. We have closets that we have to name so that we can tell where they are in the house. There's so many closets in this house. We don't need this much space. We got plenty of space. I've got a 600 square foot gaming room upstairs. That's pretty much mainly what it's used for. But I still don't want a huge collection of games because I'm just kind of a minimalist. Like when there's stuff that isn't being used in the house, it feels like a chore to me. It feels like I've got extra pets that I've got to maintain and I've got to remember the rules for and all of that stuff. So for me, it definitely doesn't make me happy just to have stuff. So a couple of our followers posted some comments here on a read, and I think they're interesting and some good points here. So our friends over at Definitely a Board Game Podcast said, in truth, I have too many, but I just love walking through and looking at my collection. That's absolutely right. Like that's the hardest part for me to give up games because even if I know it's not going to get played, there's still a work of art. Like these games have beautiful boxes. Mm-hmm. They're fun sometimes to just like you have a good experience with it and you want to kind of be able to go back to that at some time in the future. And I was a collector at a time. That's a thing that draws me in. But I've moved like 9 times in the last 12 years, carrying stuff around, having stuff that's just excess. I just don't have any interest in it anymore. So it's kind of a change for me. I think 15, 20 years ago, if I'd had the space and the money and I was in this hobby, I would have easily had several hundred games, I think. But at this point, it's just not something that's interesting to me.
For me, that's something that's like a comfort I get from going to the board game store. I can walk around and see shelves and shelves and shelves of board games and look at them all and kind of admire them. That's as much as I want to admire that amount of games. But I get that appeal of walking around or like going to the bookstore for some people. Mm-hmm. For me too. People put their heart and soul into writing this book or making a board game or whatever it is, and they're all on display. You can check them out and read a little bit about them, take a glance, and it's cool. So I get it. It's people with big old collections.
Yeah, Rick Lorenzen said, I have several sentimental games by designer friends that I supported on Kickstarter or they gifted to me. Still hope to play those with my kids when my kids get older or when I have free time for friends again someday. So yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, in Rick's case, he's got games that he really wants to play at some point or expects to get to play sometime in the future. And so he's kind of holding on to them to see if that happens at some point. Mm. So that's a pretty good reason to hold on to more games than you could actually get through. Drew said, I've got a huge collection. I give away games occasionally, but for the most part, I've had a game room I've been adding to since the 90s. It's always followed me through life and been in storage a couple times. So Drew, is probably kind of following along with the idea that he just likes having a big collection, even if you can't get it played. One more I'll mention. This is Matt Hallowell. He said, I have about 52, keep it on one shelf. And yeah, even 50 is more than I can reasonably play in a year. But it's nice to have the variety. And I agree with that. Like, yeah, I probably will not get 50 played, but I keep a couple games to say like, hey, if I get some non-gamer friends over, I want to have those kind of party games or the things that'll just get a group together having fun and an activity to do. And then I've got the games that when Steve comes out to visit, I've kept a couple of games that I think Steve's really going to dig that I'm not playing with other people, but I think he'll get a kick out of, right? So I've got those ones. And then I've got the games for when Jen and Danielle, they like certain games. So I keep those around to play with them. So it is nice to have a variety so that you can use them with the right groups. So then you end up curating a collection probably bigger than you'll play regularly or than you really need, just so that you can meet those, off chance that something happens.
Those corner cases, yeah.
Exactly. One last one I'll mention. This is Jeff Milton, our good friend Jeff. He says, I'm at 40 and find it too much. I could trade in quite a few of them for better ones, to be honest. and that's how I feel. Like, that's what I do with my collection all the time. It's like constantly like, hey, that game just doesn't get me excited anymore. I played a game this weekend I really loved. I'll talk about it a little bit later. My wife liked it. She's like, hey, you should pick that up. And I was like, perfect, because we played another game right before we left on this little trip and decided I didn't want to keep it. So now I've got one I can send out of my collection and bring another one in that'll actually get played a little bit. So
Steve, how hard was it for you to go down, what did you say you had, 75, 100 down to about 25? Was that pretty tough?
It was tough, but it was also not overnight.
Okay.
I made several sequential moves between when I had 100 games or 75 games to where I am now. So I had a lot of opportunity to weed out the ones I liked the least and build up a strategy for deciding what kind of games I want to keep. As Tim mentioned, I try to keep a variety of games based on audience. So, like, I have some games where you don't have to learn a lot of rules. I have card games. I have games for 5. I have games for 2. Even though I do like certain styles of games, the games that I buy are generally more based on the likelihood of somebody playing them.
So, culling your collection wasn't like amputating a limb. It was more like a necrotic decay, slow decay which is a good way to go through life.
Right? This game's been played once in the last 4 years. It doesn't matter. No matter how much I like that game as far as a collection for people to play, it doesn't matter anymore.
Necrotic Decay still sounds bad. I think it's more like the old dead skin is drying and falling off, and the fresh new skin is coming up and growing.
Isn't that what Necrotic Decay is?
Yeah, the mushrooms, they just eat the old material and produce new glorious material.
There you go.
I just think it's funny too, because there's games that I really want and I really want to play, but the reality is that, you know, even though I'm starting to get out to game groups again, but when you show up at a game store, everybody's brought like 3 or 4 games that they really want to play.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to force my game in. Everybody else wants to get their games played. I'm happy to play what other people are liking. And then if I discover a game that really makes me happy and really is something I want to go back to, then I'll add it to my collection. Or once in a while, if something just gets me really excited, I'll pick it up and try to get it in. But doing that too often, like everybody's got 5 new games they bought this week or got delivered from Kickstarter that they want to get played in, and nobody gets to, you know, really discover those too deeply.
Okay, I heard this too. I think it was the guys on Sporadically Board. They were talking about board game industry is kind of a pyramid scheme, right? So the new guys get into the hobby and they're like excited and pumped about games, and they go out and they buy all these games and expand their collection, and they're up to 50, 100 games or whatever. Whereas the guys that have been around longer, they're more picky about the games they're going to buy, or maybe they've culled at that point and their game supply has shrunk. So I think that was kind of an interesting point that you get, you know, you develop your taste as a board game player, and then you know what you want and you don't want anymore, and you're kind of stop adding to your collection. Or maybe you'll buy a occasional new game when it suits you right, but you're more picky, less propensity to buy new, potentially not so good games. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. It's funny because, you know, I follow board game Twitter and board game Facebook a bit, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. The board game industry thrives, and all these publishers and designers thrive on people buying their new games. There's too many there for anybody to enjoy it. And it's nice. There's a variety, right? Mm-hmm. People can enjoy, like, hey, you know, I like this type of game. So Chris, he loves Dudes on a Map games, and there's a good 10 really amazing Dudes on a Map games that he could discover and buy and love, and he'd be thrilled with that, right? But all of these content creators and journalists and stuff, they're always like, oh, I played this game, so you got to get this game, you know? And it's just, it kind of bugs me that it's so consumerism based of just like,
right,
push the hot new thing, push the latest thing. I mean, we talk about games because we love games, we love playing them, but I don't like that it's just this constant like, oh, there's this new thing that's coming up on Kickstarter. I played it, you got to check it out, you know? And it's just pushed in your face all the time. But that's how they, you know, that's what publishers have to do. They got to market, and they got to tell people that you got to get this game or you're going to miss out on it, even though all 5 of your friends just bought it and they're all going to want to play their copies. So, well, to all of you listeners out there, if you got 200 plus games, I hope you're enjoying them. And, you know, feel free to share some shelfies with us. Show us pictures of your collections.
Yeah, beautiful.
I'd love to see a collection of 200 games.
Beautiful.
That's a cool thing to get a chance to check out. All right, well, let's jump into a description of Power Grid. In Power Grid, you're running competing power companies trying to build the most effective electricity grid across Germany or the United States by developing a network of cities that you supply, building unique power plants that run on different types of fuel, and trying to buy fuel at the lowest market prices. Each round is played over a series of phases. First, players take turns bringing one of 4 available plants to market and bidding on them. Once a player wins the bidding phase for that plant and adds it to their local tableau, a new plant is added to the choices. Each player may only have 3 power plants, so over the course of the game, they may replace less effective plants with newer ones that can power more cities and run on less fuel as technological advances are made. Each plant has a starting bid cost from 3 to 50, a fuel cost, and an indication of how many cities that plant can power. Generally, more expensive and effective plants will become available later in the game. In the second phase, players will take turns buying from an energy market that consists of 4 types of energy: coal, oil, recyclables, and plutonium. Those energy resources are lined up on a grid, and as resources are taken, the prices become higher, but over the course of the game, some resources will replenish, so the cost of a particular type of energy will depend a lot on how many players are buying them. Players can buy enough resources in a round to store double the amount of a particular resource each plant they own can consume. In the third phase, players can add additional cities to their network by paying the cost to add a city and any connection costs between their current network and the destination city. In the first phase of the game, only 1 player can add a connection per city, but after a player is connected to their 7th city, phase 2 begins, and a second player can build in any city at a slightly higher cost. After the power plant deck has been depleted to a specific spot, then the third phase begins, and a third player can build in each city at again a slightly higher cost. The connection costs between cities are printed on the board and are varying costs. If needed, a player can pay the cost across multiple connections if they can't or choose not to build in an adjacent city. In the fourth and final phase of the round, players can spend energy resources they own to power cities in their network, and they get paid an income based on how many cities they powered. The player that has the most cities at the end of the round will become the first player to auction in the next round, but will become the last player to buy energy and build cities, which will put them at a disadvantage. The game end is triggered when a player has built a certain number of cities, 17 in a 3-player game, and whichever player has powered the most cities in that final round is the winner. Power Grid was designed by Friedman Freeze and published in the US by Rio Grande Games. All right, welcome back. So let's talk about Power Grid. We're going to start with gameplay and mechanisms here. And Steve, I want to start with you here. You've played this game quite a bit. Give us your hot take here on what is the most interesting mechanism about Power Grid for you.
The most interesting thing about Power Grid isn't one mechanism, but the fact that every mechanism in the game is interactive with the other players. No matter what you do in this game, you impact the other players. If you buy resources, you're impacting the other players. If you buy something at auction, you're impacting the other players. If you pass at auction, you're impacting the other players. If you build a city, you're impacting the other players. So every single thing you do impacts the other players. And that's my favorite thing about this game.
Yeah, a lot of player interaction here.
I totally agree, Steve. The interaction is fantastic. I friggin' love this game, and it's because of the interaction. There's a bunch of reasons, but the interaction is a big part of it for me. Another thing that stands out for me is the auction. It's so freaking cool how this auction works. You know a little bit about what's coming up, so it gives you a sense of where to value the power plant that you're going to try to buy or that you're going to put up for auction. And you said it, Steve, like it kind of gets tight right when the price goes to about 10 above the face value of that power plant. So you have a decent sense, and you can gauge it because those bottom 4 power plants that are coming up next, potentially, they give you some kind of valuation on the one that you're bidding on currently. So I think the auction here is pretty outstanding. What about you, Tim? What do you have?
Yeah, well, I wanted to comment on the auction. First of all, I do really enjoy it. It's always interesting decisions. The 4 that are available and knowing what's coming up next is a hard choice about, like, do I bid on this thing when I know as soon as I buy, if I win that one, then a better one's going to come up, or more likely a better one's going to come up. But that's one of the interesting things about the auction is that you don't know for sure, because the next card that comes up could be a lower numbered card, a lower valued card in the auction, and all of a sudden the one you got was the best option. So it's a really tough choice, but the choices that you get to make in that auction about the cost that you're paying, but also the resources that it costs to generate however number buildings, and what the market is for those resources, how competitive is the market. And that leads into what I think is the most interesting part about this game, which is the market with it. There are 4 types of resources that can power your plants. You've got coal, oil, trash, which this would be like a recycling plant, I assume, or something like that, and then plutonium. And the market at the beginning of the game starts out where coal is very cheap, $1 per coal, and then oil is a little bit more expensive, but trash is really expensive, because where we start out here. Go ahead, Adam, you want to jump in?
I'm gonna give a quick shout out to renewables. That's kind of the 5th energy, if you like. So there's a few power plants you don't have to pay any resources for them to work. You just use hydroelectric or the wind or whatever. You just pay the upfront costs, and then you got your energy for free.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although that doesn't impact the market at all, because there is no. Well, it does. It does kind of in a way, because if somebody's got a lot of renewables, then they're not impacting the market, and so you're going to get the other stuff cheaper, which is
right. Are you going to pay $50 for a hydroelectric? Or are you going to pay $35 for oil that powers just as many, and the oil is super cheap?
But what's great about this market is that all of the resources that are available to players are lined up across these little tables at the bottom of the board. And as people take resources from those markets, then they get more expensive. As they go up groups, they get more expensive. And it's so fun to watch that market over the course of the game. If the first round, 2 people bid on coal plants and 1 person bids on an oil plant, that oil is going to stay a lot cheaper for the rest of the game while the coal is going to be competitive. And you get this shifting throughout the game where the next round, nobody wants to bid on a coal plant because coal's expensive. So let's bid on recycling. And, that's a little bit cheaper. Or let's get some oil because Steve's getting away with all this cheap oil. So that market is just so well done. It's probably a little fiddly, I would guess, in person. We played on Tabletop Simulator, the couple of games that I've played of it. The way that it works and the way that you interact with it is just it's so smooth. How did you feel about that from, when you're playing with it, Steve? Is that market a pain to work with, or is it pretty easy to move those resources around all the time?
The market's not too bad at all. The money is actually a much bigger problem, honestly. Because the market you only deal with at the end of the round. You've got a list. Is there a way in phase 2? Okay, we do these 4 things, we're done. So refilling the market, as long as you remember to do it every time, is not a problem. But dealing with that Monopoly money is the only thing I don't like about this game. I love everything else about the game, but
yeah, we'll get into that in production for sure, because I think that's a big thing to call out.
But no, restocking the resource houses are not a problem.
Yeah, so that's for me, that market is really the driving factor, and it kind of drives the economy of the whole thing. Like, depending on how much you have to pay for power, that tells you how much money you have to spend on building new factories, and how much money you have to spend on the next auction. And if I buy this, if I pay more in this auction, am I going to have the money to power my power plant? So that whole economy and how everything is kind of interconnected between those pieces, I think this game does it really well.
Agreed. The market's cool. It sort of reminds me of Brass Birmingham a little bit, how it kind of fluctuates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no kind of phases in Brass Birmingham. It just kind of refills and depletes kind of organically as players take their turn or flip their little iron plants or coal plants or whatever they're using. I think you were making some comparisons. Maybe we'll jump into that later, Tim, but you were saying that Martin Wallace might have taken some inspiration from Power Grid.
Yeah, I did say that. These are the 2 games that I've got any experience with an economy like that. I agree. It does have a similar feel, and I really like it. That was one of my favorite things about Brass, was that coal and iron economy.
It has that nice supply and demand like built in, and it feels so good, and it feels so like how it should work. It's really neat. It's clever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Power Grid is a few years earlier. Power Grid came out in 2004, and Brass Lancashire came out in 2007. Okay. So, he may or may not have been influenced here, but definitely both of them do something really unique. We were talking about this a little bit on why are we not seeing more games that have an economy like this? And my honest feeling here is that it is just done so elegantly in this game. It's just, the way everything ties together and works. It's quick and easy to teach. It's quick and easy to play. It's not complicated, but it just is perfect. Yeah, I could imagine if anybody tried to take this similar type of mechanism and do something with it today, it'd probably end up like overly complicated. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that's why nobody's done it, because they probably played with it and just, but Power Grid's still better than what I just put together, So I think that's a feat that this game was out in 2004 and still really stands out with a mechanism set like this.
All right. Regarding the interaction in this, my question for mostly Tim, but I want to hear Steve's take too. So comparing to this to something like Lost Ruins of Arnak or Anachrony, the interaction and the feel I get, you're actually playing against the players more so than the game system or, resource management style. At least that's the sense I get from this game. And that's what elevates this game for me above those games. Do you guys, what's your take on the interaction here and your preference, I guess, the puzzle and how it feels on your brain of Power Grid versus like Lost Ruins or Anachrony?
Well, so my initial thought is that even though the decisions might end up being more interesting in a game like Anachrony, one of the things I like about Power Grid is that within limitations, you can do something if you have enough money. Yeah, maybe you want to buy that 17 cost power plant, but if you have $30, you can buy some kind of power plant. So you just have to hedge that money a little bit, and it's the constant resource throughout the game, right? You have to have money to buy power plants and to build cities, and that's something that I clearly mismanaged this particular game. I did not have enough income to generate cash to build cities, so that was definitely a failing.
So I'm gonna say, Adam, that obviously there's a lot of fun to be had when you are trash talking people, and what you do impacts other people, and you get to mess with them, right? There's definitely fun to be had with that. It can also be frustrating because you do lose some control over what you can do, but that's part of the game here, and I think it's handled really well. I mean, there are definitely games where you're trying to do some planning, and the interaction gets in the way of the fun for me. That doesn't happen with Power Grid. I think it's not so negative. If somebody buys up 3 extra oil that they needed to, it just costs you $3 extra probably, right? And so it's not the end of the world, but it does, the economy's tight, and it does have some impact, and it's just like, oh, that's so frustrating, they got to it before me, I wish I would have had that. But it's not so frustrating to where it's like I can't do what I wanted to do for the most part, right? And the
Right.
auctioning is the same way. People do outbid you, but maybe you pay $10 over the sticker price or something like that. And everyone kind of seems to fall into like, oh, I feel like I'm just getting a little too expensive, so I'm gonna back off now, right before it feels like it's too expensive for you. So I think that the interaction is fun and it works really well here. But I'm going to lead that into one of the two negatives I have with the game. Did you have anything else to mention about the interaction before I get into that, though?
It's what, maybe $5 to $10 of missing out. Like if somebody buys that oil before you, just to put a number on it.
Right.
It's so thin, it's so tight. Like you're saying, that at the end of the game, that $2 made a big difference for me, or at least somewhat of a difference for building another city. So these little, these
Sure.
tiny cuts throughout the game add up to a nice sum at the end of the game, which I think is fantastic.
But the nice thing is you can pivot too, right? If somebody's, like being a jerk and taking all the oil from you, then next time go and buy a recycling plant or a clean energy plant, and you don't have to worry about like replace your oil plant that you had before. So you got an opportunity to pivot if things are not going your way because of that player interaction.
It's a constant like chess match and butt of heads. It's pretty neat. It's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk about the one. I know that this is put here to make this game competitive throughout, but the one thing that I don't think I like about the game, and this is after 2 plays, is the catch-up mechanism that's built in here. And it's pretty heavy, but basically the idea that turn order is determined based on who has built the most factories. Doesn't even matter if you can power them, but if you've built the most factories. So whoever has the most goes first in the auction, but they go last in buying power, and they go last in building buildings. Pretty big negative. And it can actually be as close as like 2 people can have the same number of buildings, but one person has a slightly more expensive power plant on their thing. It costs a lot. It's a very big negative that you have to auction first, and that you have to buy energy last, and that you have to buy houses last. There's a trade-off, of course. If you're in the lead in power plants, then of course you're powering them, then you're going to get more income coming in. So that's what the benefit is there. But this just feels like a constant, I don't want to do well, because if I do well, then other people are going to get the better options, and everything is going to cost me. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to me for someone who likes to just drive and say, like, I want to make the right decision every round to help me extend my lead. But this game, it's not the right choice a lot of the time. A lot of the time, it's not the right choice to do well. And that doesn't sit well with me. How do you guys feel about that mechanism and how it plays into the game?
So I just have 2 comments about it. First of all, you were in the lead from almost the beginning of the game, which is why you felt this immense pressure on you the entire game.
And last game, too.
And you still won. There's a reason that mechanism is necessary. Because otherwise, if you were in the lead that much, there's no other catch-up mechanism in the game.
Yeah.
If there was an alternate catch-up mechanism, fine. But there just isn't. So you have to have it, or else you would just run away with it. And I think the second part of it is maybe a little bit thematic, right? Like you don't necessarily want to be General Electric, right? In terms of like drawing attention to yourself and legislation and stuff like that. So maybe it's not so good to be the big guy right out.
Definitely, yeah. Billionaires never want more billions. They always want to make sure other people are ahead of them.
I don't have a problem with that mechanism. It is a little weird at first, but that's part of the game, and you just adjust to it.
Now, Steve, you ended up pretty far in the back in this game. Do you feel like that was driven by your intent of staying behind at the beginning, and then that ended up hurting you over the course of the game? Like, have you had intentionally bought more buildings early, you might have done better, but was that intentional, or did you just not have the money to buy more buildings early in the game?
It was kind of threefold. Like at the very beginning, like first power plant that I really wanted was probably out of my budget, and I bought it anyway. And that was great because it let me power stuff really cheaply. And then another power plant came up that was probably out of my budget, but was great. And I loved every single one of my power plant purchases, but I just wasn't saving enough cash left over to actually build cities to power with those power plants. Like that was, I'm pretty sure that was my favorite power plant selection I've ever had at the end of the game, but to no effect.
Yeah, that was rad. By the end of the game, Steve just skipped over the last two power purchase phases.
I'm just buying green
He
power.
didn't need to buy any resources because he was just powering he only had 8 cities though, so it wasn't that hard to power.
Right, that's the problem. That's the problem, right? Yeah. So it was just kind of a domino effect. I invested too heavily in power plants at the beginning of the game because I felt like they were really good purchases, but then I kept doing it, and that didn't work out.
I love this catch-up mechanism. For a guy like me, that sometimes games don't come right away. Like I'm kind of dumb when it comes to learning games. So we played it for the first time last week or 2 weeks ago, and it took me a while to figure out what was going on. But then by the time I did sort of figure out, it wasn't too late for me. I could still buy those nice power plants and pick up on the cheap resources and power my stuff and catch up. So from that perspective, it's nice. But also, like Steve said, it is part of the game. Like if you're going to be in the lead, you better know what's going to happen. You're going to kind of hose yourself in all these different ways. So you can plan it out. It gives you enough information, I think, to, if you're going to try to walk that tightrope of being in the lead, you can plan it out and try to figure it out and make it happen. And you did a really nice job of it tonight, Tim, like hanging on. I tried gunning for you at the end, but I couldn't catch up. So I don't know. This game's not hiding anything from you. You're gonna get beat up if you're in the lead. So I think it's great.
There's a term for that, right? It's like open information.
Yeah.
I mean,
The money's hidden.
The money is hidden, but other than that, like everything else is open.
One of the things I did get a chance to play around with this time, which I liked, on my first play, I think it felt like, okay, I've got this much money. This is how many resources I'm going to buy, and that'll leave me enough to buy this many things, this many houses. And the catch-up mechanism does allow you to play a little bit where you don't have to optimize on the houses because it's not necessarily the best idea. But there were some rounds where I bought up twice as much coal as I needed to because I was planning to auction for a bigger coal plant the next round, which would have let me use that coal to power more stuff. And I did that, and Adam's like, what are you doing? Why are you spending more for that coal than you actually need at this point?
That was pretty smooth. Yeah, that was nice.
But I literally was trying to buy out the market so that in the next few rounds where I knew I was going to be using a lot of coal, I wouldn't be competing with Adam for it, and he'd have to pay more in the next round for it. So I got to play around with that, and that seemed to work out pretty well. I also planned around some of those auctions the round before, and at some point I built up enough power in my city that I felt like that was going to be all I needed. And so I was able to kind of stay out of the last 2 auction rounds. I actually jumped in once just to raise the prices on something I knew you guys would want, but I was able to kind of step away and use that money at the end to build houses. So it was fun to just kind of play and say like, okay, do I really want to spend everything I can right now, or do I want to hold back or spend in this place and save in this place, and how is that going to work out? And I think there's a lot to play with in this economy. It's pretty fun.
Did you jump in on the hydroelectric to get the price
exactly
up? Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. And Steve took it.
Steve bought it.
I already had spent all my money anyway, so.
I mean, it would have been nice to have that plant. It probably would have about broke even in the last 2 or 3 rounds, but I didn't need it. It wasn't really going to give me that much more power. Ultimately, though, if Adam had a little more cash, he ended up overbuilding from where I was. So it was closer than I expected it to be. I thought I was going to be able to finish off that game at a pretty solid lead, and it was pretty close to Adam being able to catch up to me at the end there.
If I wouldn't have bought that plant for $59, I probably could have built 3 more cities and actually
2 or 3.
You would have gotten up to 11.
On buying that plant for no reason. I couldn't even power the ones I had. They were full of energy already. So
well, it's still nice that you invested in that green infrastructure.
It was, and it's so pretty. You got to buy that 50 if you can.
Another mechanism that I wasn't a hugest fan of is the in-game scoring on this one. It seems a little weird to me that the winner is the person who can power the most cities at the end. I guess they have to pick something to be the winning criteria. I don't know why it's not just most money in hand at the end. I don't know, maybe the math doesn't work out right or something like that. But What do you guys think of that winning the in-game, I guess the winning criteria, not just the in-game for 17 with 3 players, 17 cities, but
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, Adam, and I think it makes sense. And the reason is because if it weren't for the way that they put that endgame situation together, the last round, the last turn of the game or last round of the game would be pretty like non-thematic. And let's say that the winning condition was who built the most houses. Then the right decision is don't buy any resources in the last round so you can spend money on houses.
Right.
Well, that's not fun because now you've got a whole bunch of power plants that aren't powering anything. Or if it's the most money, then you just don't buy any resources again. So I think it makes sense that the whole point is to be powering plants. If you have to be able to power the most plants, I think that's kind of cool. And I like that someone could buy up and try to push the end game. I almost did. At the previous round, I got into 16 power plants. And if I'd saved a little bit of money, I could have gotten it to 17 and pushed the end game. And I might have won that round, but I think I could have powered 13, even if I had 17. Adam might have been able to power 14. And I think that's kind of cool that it just, it didn't allow me to just kind of push the end game without being able to actually afford all the stuff that I built up.
Yeah, it's a built-in, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it's sort of a built-in prevention against that rapid building. Because if you spend all of your money building houses, you're not spending the auctioning and the resource gathering money to power those houses. So it's really neat.
Yeah. I think I see what you're saying though, Adam, because the idea that if you had been able to run the last phase and get the money from the last phase of power plants and then have the most money, that probably would have worked okay as well, I guess.
Maybe it's cool. I just have to play with that in my brain a little bit more. It seems like you guys make some good points about it. It just was a little different to me how they came up with that.
So I'll mention the one that kind of leads me to the one other thing that I haven't loved on my first 2 plays. And again, this is just 2 plays. So, this could change out over time. Maybe Steve can speak to this a little bit. But in both plays, it felt like the game ramps up nicely and that catch-up mechanism keeps everybody, kind of competitive. But in both games, it felt like it came down to the last round and it was who could power one more plant, or build one more plant. It was so close after all that effort and work. Steve fell behind on this game, but on the first game that we played, we all got to I think we all hit 17 plants, and then Adam was able to power 17 and we were able to power 16 or something like that. Both games felt too close at the end in a way. I don't hate it if that's something that's going to happen occasionally, but if that always ramps up to that point because of that catch-up mechanism, it gets to that point where I'm like, why did I just play for 2 hours if it really comes down to this last round and everything's built towards this? That's a little, again, that I think that goes back to the catch-up mechanism and what's frustrating to me about it. That's been after a couple plays.
I could be wrong, but not all of that is from that single catch-up mechanism. Right, being in first does give you a disadvantage. Being in last does also give you a slight advantage, but there are other mechanisms that shift throughout the game that you also have to take advantage of. And being in the lead isn't necessarily conducive to that. People can tell where you're going if you build first. They're going to target you if you have the most buildings. So, not all of it's necessarily that one mechanism, but granted, it is generally very tight when I've played. I haven't played a lot of 3-player games. But clearly, if you make bad decisions, the mechanisms aren't going to just save you.
They're going to cost you.
It's not magic. It's still lost badly. So, yeah.
Yeah, Tim, I agree. This does kind of like Pan Am has this kind of thing. Everyone has the same amount of shares in Pan Am at the end, or usually. And then it comes down to who has the most money left over. Why did I just do all this rigmarole if it's just going to come down to $5 versus $2 at the end?
Yeah.
So
that's and it's interesting. So a game like this where you're basically playing to 17 power plants, or right around there, 17, 18, 19. Maybe you get up to 20. I don't know if that's possible. It probably is. Versus something like Dune Imperium where you're just playing to 10 points, and it often comes to tiebreakers, but it feels so much more meaningful. And I think it's because the way you get to those points comes in so many different ways, and you just have to struggle for each one of them. And this just feels like everyone's going to build up over the course of the game, and the people that are building up the fastest are going to have a rougher time later on, so other people are going to catch up. And yeah, that's it. I had fun playing both games, but both of them felt a little anticlimactic at the end because it came down to such a tight tiebreaker.
It comes back to $2 or $3. If you can eke out that $2 or $3 each round, then the cumulative effect at the end might have you taking it all. So it's very tight.
Yeah, and I guess that's interesting. Yeah, so it makes the auctions
Mm-hmm.
more valuable. It makes the economy more useful. The one last thing I don't think we've talked about in mechanisms is the map. How do you guys feel about the, kind of the build out on the map mechanism?
I like it when it goes my way.
It's interesting, right? So it has the regions all divided up, and for 3 players, 3 regions. It adds some asymmetry to the game, so it's not totally, the same for all players. Some regions are going to have easier cities to connect to, cheaper cities to connect to initially, and then some regions are going to have more expensive connections. So I don't know, does it matter? Like by the end of the game, I feel like it maybe just all balances out. So if you want to build cities early, go in the cheap area, and if you want to build cities late, I don't know. So I don't have a good sense. What's your take, Tim?
Yeah, the only thing that kind of intrigues me and frustrates me about it is that it seems really interesting, right? If you're the first one to build in a city, it costs you 10. If you're the second one after the second area starts, it costs you 15, and in the third area you can build for 20 if you're the third one. So it sounds like you want to rush to them, right? But there's some ways to rush to them by like building over somebody else's city and having to pay through 2 pipeline costs. But basically you're saving yourself $5 to rush ahead. Like you're getting to another space and saving yourself $5, but maybe you just had to pay $20 to get there. I don't know that the value, especially because the fact that you're going to have a negative if you get more cities than other people. It seems intriguing. It seems interesting. And I'm sure there's a fun puzzle there to say, like, where should I start my city? Where can I optimize it? And things like that. But I think that whole idea of having more cities is a bad thing for the most part. It doesn't really incent you to spend extra money to, rush ahead and build in front of people to save a few bucks later on.
So Steve, you played this game at 4 players, right? There's only room for 3 cities in each city, or 3 power plants, or whatever you want to call it, in each city. So at 4 players, somebody gets blocked out. That third city comes up, you can't build there anymore.
Right.
What's it like at 4?
Well, it's very slow, depending on the speed of the players that you're playing with. But no, yeah, you're right. The board gets super tight really fast, especially during phase 1, because even though there's more areas, it's really easy to get blocked off into a corner. Then you got to pay extra to jump over them, and it just gets really expensive. To Tim's point about how he's not sure if paying that extra cost to get to the unoccupied city is worth it, I think the answer to that is what's on the other side of that city,
Sure.
right? If it's a dead end and you're just going to get one more city, probably not worth it. But if it leads you to an area where you could potentially get some cheaper connections, then maybe it is worth it. And so that's one of the
Build
other
a bunch of
little
cheap stuff.
game there. Did I answer your question? I forgot what it was.
Yeah, that does. Yeah, I think so. And especially I would guess if you're playing 4 players and there's a bigger map to explore there. And
Right.
I do like the idea. Like with 3 players, the map hasn't felt too tight. Yeah, we're starting to step on each other's toes, but we can all build in every city for a few bucks more. But when you're at 4 players, there are going to be people blocked out of certain cities.
There's going to be that race element with 4 players. You want to get somewhere sooner. It's going to be a lot cheaper if you can get there first rather than later. You might have to get really stung with the pipeline fees going through a city and not be able to place your dude there.
Yeah, that makes it, I think that would make it more interesting. Or, maybe we've just kind of stayed away from each other. We could get in front of each other a little bit more. So maybe an experienced player will do that.
You can, depending on the situation, we've been pretty hands off, like stay in our own area as much as possible. Not everyone plays that way, and not every map plays that way either.
All right. Well, let's talk about the production of Power Grid. I wanted to start with one feature, and that is that when I had previously just seen some pictures online of this game, it looked to me like it was going to feel very dry, just a map of networks and stuff like that. But I actually really like the artwork in this game. Not only the artwork on the power plants, which has this realistic but kind of a cartoony feel to them, which I really like that style, and I think it works really well here, but the map itself also has that style throughout it when you look closely at the detail. And I just like it. It just works really well for me. It doesn't feel outdated. It doesn't feel too cartoony. It doesn't feel too serious. So it has a really fun, for what is really a dry theme, like the driest of dry themes, building power plant networks. I like what they did to just give it a little bit of a fun flair to it. So I really like the artwork here. What do you guys think? Does the artwork work for you?
I love the artwork, man. It reminds me of this era of board games. It's kind of, I don't want to say the early 2000s board game artwork, but it has that feel to it of a kind of a bygone, like classic board game era to me. So It's cool. All the like there's rivets on all these like pipes, and you can see like rusted pipes and wires running through them, and it's fantastic. Yeah, I totally agree, Tim. The artwork really works for me. It might not look the most pleasing from a first, superficial view, but you look further into it, and it's just cool. I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
Well, really quick, that's interesting that you said that it feels like it's from a bygone era to you, because to me, it feels like this could have been, like the production to me almost looks like it could have been done today. Like I was expecting more of a dry Euro, poorly drawn look to it, and this stuff all looks to me really, it works. It gives it just the right touch that feels more fresher to me. So
It's almost Ticket to Ride-ish. I don't know. If you look at like the America one, I feel like it has a bit of a Ticket to Ride feel from the map, and it's definitely doesn't compare for me with something like Brass Birmingham, the artwork in Brass Birmingham. So I don't know. Like I still really enjoy it, and I think it's cool and it works. I think it has that early 2000s trademark, I'd say.
I mean, I'd say the color palette is intentionally like 1960s, 1970s.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though some of the font work is newer and the lines are crisp, like I don't know, it definitely seems to be intentionally drawing you back to a bygone era, as it were. And then, you start with coal plants and then you work your way towards the future. And the artwork makes me think of like a 70s or an 80s production, but I love it all. Like, I have no complaints about it. It's easy to, like, there's no problems with like colors or readability or anything like that. It's great.
So now I'm looking at a picture here on Board Game Geek. Steve, maybe you can speak to this. Does it come with like a little auction stand? It looks like there's something that folds up and you put the little tiles up there and you have a little display case.
The one that I've played was a very, very old edition purchased at a little stand where the author in Chicago was selling their game, and like they had a little booth at the Chicago Game Board Festival.
No way.
And a friend of mine bought it, and it literally sat in the closet with his other 50 games for a long time. 10 years.
you think he bought it from Friedman Freeze? Friedman Freeze was sitting there at the game convention?
How would we know?
Designer?
That was a long time ago. Right? It was like
Probably a representative of the publisher, but
probably. But anyway, yeah, it was just a little booth, and we bought it, or he bought it, and then it sat in the closet for 7 years, and then one day he was like, "Hey, what about this game we never played?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and that was So
it's funny because I'm trying to look through the pictures on Board Game Geek, and like 90% of the pictures are people with like their own power plants that they've created or like upgrades that they've put on it. So obviously people have a passion for this game over a long period of time. Steve, how are the resources? Are they plastic? Or are they wood? What are the resources made out of?
they're shaped wood. So like the trash can is a cylinder, coal is a square. They're wood pieces. They're the oil and coal are a little hard to distinguish, just like they're in the real game. But the shapes are a little easier to tell apart.
Okay.
Yeah, the only other thing that's a little confusing is that in the production that I've played, the wooden player tokens, they're also wood and they use the same color palettes as some of the resources. So the yellow player's tokens look like trash cans and the red player's tokens look like plutonium. Some games like the player tokens are wood, like Scythe, right? You can tell what the unit can do based on its material. And in this one, they're all just wood. They're nice to handle, right? Wood's fun to play with.
And Steve, you mentioned earlier the Monopoly money. How is that working for this game for you?
It's a lot of making change for 1s and 5s and 10s. Yeah. It's just a lot of handling dollar bills back and forth.
Yeah, paper money is not fun at all. This definitely, and that's probably a product of its era, of its time. Let's kickstart an upgraded version of this with nicely shaped resources and poker chips.
Yeah.
Anything else to say about the production, you guys?
To save people a few clicks on Board Game Geek, it says there's 29 expansions. They have Middle East, South Africa. There's a ton of expansions. A bunch of different maps. Looks like all over the world. There's like some little modules, industrial espionage, and taxes. So little supplements you can add to the game.
All right, well, let's talk about favorite moments of the game tonight. So, Adam, what was your favorite moment of this experience? Or what was a moment that stood out to you, even if you hated it?
Coming down to that last round was one, just in general, I was just talking some mad trash this game. This game gets me fired up. It's such high interaction. And if I can like screw Steve out of $2, I don't know why that makes me feel so good. Or if Tim's coming at me and he Steve got me with some uranium, and he just like took 3 uranium or something. So that upped the price by like, I don't know, $5-6 for my 1 measly uranium that I needed to power my guys. So just moments like that are just hilarious to me in this game, and they crop up all the time. But I think coming down to that last round there, Tim, was pretty fun, pretty intense. I suspected that you had it in the bag, but I had bought a power plant so I could power up to 19 power plants at that point. So I at least had you sweating a little bit, I think, because you can only power up to 17 or 18.
18. I could do 18.
Yeah. So, but what I was only able to get, I don't know, 15 or, I was only able to power 15 or build that many houses.
I think you got up to 17. So yeah, you did have me sweating. When I saw you could build that many, I was worried because I knew I could only hit 18 and I wasn't even sure I could build in power up to 18, although I did.
Right.
And I could have actually built the 19th, but I couldn't power it. So if you would have had the cash to build those last two locations, you would have been good.
That was a fun little economic kind of puzzle for me. Am I going to be able to buy this power plant and then get the resources and still build the houses and able to surpass Tim on this final round? And it came close, like sort of close. You had this one for sure, but it was a nice, kind of thrilling little moment for me.
What about you, Steve? Any favorite moments tonight?
Just buying such awesome power plants. I was just having a blast. Like, that was the best power plant ever. I'm going to buy it. I don't care. But towards the end of the game, even though I was like behind, like my engine was starting to build some momentum. I could actually build some cities. I didn't need to buy any more resources. That was fun. Like, I literally didn't need to buy any resources for like 4 turns. So it was just a few turns too late. I just, tried to ramp up too fast. And that's all.
Yeah, so I had a couple things. Just one I'll mention, and Adam alluded to this, but we're like 1 turn into the game and people are just starting to like pick what power they're going to buy. And Adam starts like swearing like crazy at every decision that everybody's making. So it's like, I don't think I've ever seen Adam that feisty. So there's definitely, the game has some fun moments from that interaction that comes. But I think my favorite moment of the game tonight, and I mentioned how it annoys me that there's a heavy catch-up mechanism, and I don't like it that it seems like everyone's going to end close. But when we're coming into the second to last round and I'm at like 16 plants and Adam's at 15, we know it's probably going to end on the next round, and I look at Steve sitting at 8 power plants at that point. And it just cracked me up because like the whole game it seemed like he had the energy market cornered. Like he was always buying the cheapest energy.
Yeah,
he had like free energy, and I was just like expecting him to run away with the game, and he's sitting there at 8 power plants. So
yeah, like, so that catch-up mechanism didn't hurt you too bad, did it?
Yeah, I had to work extra hard to win that one though. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, okay, well, it sounds good. Would you request to play this game again, Steve?
Yeah, not tomorrow because we played it a couple weeks ago, and then I played it in person, and then we played it tonight, which I love this game. But eventually I would definitely ask to play it again. It's one of my top 50 games for sure.
Would it have made your top 10 list if you joined us last week for our top 10 games of all time? Don't think too.
Probably not. It's not on my shelf.
Okay.
But I do like it.
What about you, Adam? Would you request to play Power Grid again?
Absolutely. This game is fantastic. I think it's rapidly encroaching on my top 20, top 10 games. It's moving up quick. So yeah, I would say at least, I don't know, if in ideal circumstances where I had unlimited access to board game groups, I'd want to play this game like, I don't know, once, twice a month and add it to the circulation. So yeah, this game's fantastic. I might have to go pick it up. What about you, Tim?
Cool. I like this game a lot, and the things we talked about, the market mechanism, the auction, that's all really fun. The game's really fun, but the couple things that I have as negatives about it, I think keep it out of me wanting to go search it out. There are other games that don't give me some of those negatives. That said, maybe those things, they fall off over time. I had a good time playing this both times we played it so far. I expect you guys will be wanting to play it more in our rotation. I'm happy to. I think it's a great game. I think it's a really strong game that does some things in fun and interesting ways that I haven't seen in other games. So I really like it. I probably won't be requesting it anytime soon, but I could see coming back and saying, hey, we haven't played this for 6 months. I want to check that out again. Let's play it. So maybe sometime in the future, but this isn't going to be a first choice for me.
Yeah. Computer aloofness aside on my part, mostly, how long did this game take us to play tonight?
I think it was 1 hour and 45 for us to get through. We had a couple interruptions though, and some of the challenges with because I think that's about right. So not too bad. It went pretty quickly once we all knew the game.
It seemed relatively brisk, and by the end of it, we were scooting right along with this was a very nicely scripted version. We think's nicely scripted version on TTS. We got the flow going pretty nice by the end of it, so I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's worth the time. I mean, I definitely don't regret the couple hours we put into it. It's a fun one. All right, sounds good. Well, I think that'll wrap up our conversation on Power Grid. We're going to talk about some things we're excited about in the world of board gaming right after this. All right, welcome back. So let's start by talking about some games that we've been playing this week. If you guys have anything interesting to chat about, I got a chance to play a few new games that were new to me this weekend that I'll mention fairly quickly. So I'm going to start with one, and then I'll hand it off to one of you guys. The game I think I had the most fun with this weekend, I've only played it one time, and that was Isle of Skye from Chieftain to King is the full name of it. Alexander Pfister design. It looks like he co-designed with Andreas Pelikan, and this was published by Lookout Games. This is a really fun, fairly straightforward, kind of low mid-weight game. It's rated at 2.25 on BGG, but it's basically a tile building game. It's, kind of you're building tiles, putting them together. Think Carcassonne style type of thing, and you're trying to meet certain conditions. There's two things that are really cool about this game. One is that the way you get your tiles at the beginning of the round, everybody takes 3 tiles out of a bag, puts them in front of them, and then behind a blind screen, they decide the value of those tiles. They're going to mark one of those tiles are going to be thrown away, and they're going to set the price on the other 2 by paying their own money, putting their own money behind the screen next to each of those tiles. So for example, I can set the price for one of the tiles to be 2 gold, and I just put 2 gold behind it. And I could set another one to be 5 gold. I put 5 gold behind it. When I remove the screen, before I can take any of those tiles, everybody goes around and gets to buy one tile from somebody else at the table. And it can be the tile in front of you, but they have to pay the price that you set on that tile. So if I set 5 gold on that and somebody else wants it, they give me 5 gold and I get to keep the 5 gold I put behind it. If my tiles don't get bought though, I have to pay the price that I set on them. So it's a pretty interesting way to kind of determine the market. How valuable is this tile? So I like that a lot. The other part that I really love though, and this goes back to what I love about Gaia Project, is that there are randomly drawn at the beginning of every game 4 end round scoring bonuses. And the game is played over, I think, 6 rounds. But in the first round, only one of the bonuses scores. And so in the first round, you're kind of going after this one bonus. In the second round, a different one scores. In the third round, two bonuses score. And it escalates over the course of the game. Each of the bonuses is going to get scored 3 times, but at different times. So you're always kind of trying to get different tiles at different points of the game to score at the right time and get the benefit from it. Really, really fun. Loved it. I think there's a lot of gameplay in here because of the variability of the bonus tiles. And I'm really excited to play this again. My wife played it with me and a couple friends we had, and she loved it. She's like, you got to pick this one up. So I think I'll be adding this one to our collection, and it'll be bumping something else out pretty quickly here. So that's the first one. Have you guys gotten a chance to play anything new this week?
Well, and so Alexander Pfister, he did Maracaibo, is that right? And Great Western Trail, are those his?
Yep, and Broom Service and Oh My Goods, and yeah, so he's done a ton of designs.
Okay, so for me, no, I haven't played anything new this week. I've just been cleaning my house and taking care of babies.
All right.
What about you, Steve?
Yeah, well, I'll just kind of talk about the last 2 weeks just because I've played more games than usual, or more games than usual recently. First one I'll mention is The Mind. It's a collective game where you basically have cards, I don't know, 1 through 100, I think.
Yeah.
And depending on how many players there are, you take some cards out, but basically you go around the table and you have to try to guess who at the table has the lowest card, and that person has to play the lowest card. And if somebody plays out of order, you all get penalized. And you can either win if you all guess correctly for a certain number of turns, you get lives, and you have a weapon you can use once in a while. And it's just a fun non-game.
Hey, Adam, have you ever played The Mind?
I have not ever played mine. I don't think I want to. What do you think?
Yeah, so I have played this game, and every single group that I've ever introduced to loved it.
Really?
I can't tell you how many people bought a copy of The Mind because I introduced it as like a quick little filler game that we could play. That's one of those games where you're like, is this a game or is it just an activity you're doing? There's a game, it's a co-op game. What Steve didn't mention is that nobody is allowed to talk while you're, obviously you can have conversation that's unrelated to the game. You're not supposed to be saying or giving any hints at all about what you have. And so the game really comes down to how long do I pause where I think somebody else is pausing so long that I must have the next number in the thing.
Yep.
And the first time you play, you're going to fail on the second card or the third card you play. But after you play with the group for a few rounds, you try that first hand a few times. And then all of a sudden you're starting to realize, well, if I've got one that's 10 numbers away and so everyone else is pausing like,
seconds.
5, 6, 7 seconds, then I think I must have the one. And you'll see people starting to like, oh, should I put it out? Okay, I'm going to put it out. And then, oh, you were one number off from me. And it actually it turns into a lot of fun. A lot of fun moments that can happen out of it. I would assume with the right group, I would think there's some groups that this is going to be a huge fail for. But I've had fun playing it. We introduced several people at one point. I just gave it to a friend and said, here, you keep it. We played it enough. But then we've been in several other situations where we had some friends over and my wife's like, let's get the Mind out because these guys would love that. And I'm like, I don't have it anymore. So I'm thinking about picking up a second copy.
You know what? I'm convinced. I want to try this game. I think you get a couple beers in you and you start getting this game out. It could get pretty wacky. Seems pretty fun.
It's fun. It is. Steve, did you enjoy it? Did you have fun with it?
Yeah, this was my second play. First play with this group of people. None of them had played it before. It went great. And the first time we made it to like round 2 or 3, third time we made it to round 5, third time we made it to 7. We didn't quite beat the game, but maybe with a little more practice we could have, and it was just a fun time. So that's my first game that I wanted to talk about.
I'm going to chime in with something here. It's not a game that I've played, and it's totally, I don't know, I'm just doing my own thing here. It's Smartphone Inc. And I brought this up with you, Tim, via text, I don't know, a week ago or something. I've heard so many good things about this game, and I was really turned off by the name of it, and the dude on the cover is some like yuppie businessman looking at a tablet or something, or probably a smartphone. Hearing more about this game, it's a super streamlined, it seems like it operates so smoothly, almost kind of like, I don't know what to say, like Power Grid, or since we just played it tonight, but it has like a nice order of operations, and it just flows, and it's actually like a bit of an area control economic game with like a lot of interaction. So that's one game that has been on my mind. If any listeners out there have any insight, I want to hear about it because this game sounds cool to me.
Yeah, this game has about as exciting of a theme as building up power plants, a power grid across the country. But obviously, as we said, that doesn't make it a bad game. So I've also heard good things about it. I would be willing to try it, but I'm not excited about it. So if you pick this some night, Adam, I'll play it with you and hopefully really like it. But man, I'm in this business and I have no interest in taking my business home and playing a board game based out of it. So
hopefully it blows our minds. But I can see it being like a horrible bust too. Just be like, what is this stupid game, Adam? Get out of here.
It's supposed to be cool mechanisms to it, and it sounds like interesting mechanisms. I just prefer a different theme, I think. So that's how I've been feeling about it since I heard about it. When this first got announced, a lot of people are like, oh, I can't wait to play this game. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? There's no way that game can be any good. But as people have started to play it, it does sound like there's some really fun and unique mechanisms that are worth tackling. There's some cool engine building, I guess. So that gets me excited.
That's exactly what's kept me away is the theme. I'm just like, what? Smartphone Inc.?
Well, anyway, that was supposed to be covered in the games we're excited about segment, but we'll just move right along here. It's cool. I got one more I'll talk about, and I think Steve has another one too. The other game I finally got to play was Seven Wonders Duel. Have you guys ever played Seven Wonders, the card drafting game?
No.
Okay. Seven Wonders is a civilization game, but it's a card drafting game. The whole game is, it's like the same mechanism as playing Sushi Go or something like that. Basically, everyone starts with 7 cards in an era, and you pick one of the cards and you hand the rest to the person to the left of you. It's been a little while since I played the original Seven Wonders, but one of the things is that when you take the card that you're playing, you have to be able to pay the mechanisms for it. So there might be a cost to put it in your tableau, or the cost might be a resource that you've already had generated. So it's kind of a fun, like, you're trying to not just take these cards, but you have to be able to play them, and you have to have enough money to do it. And then it goes through 3 eras, and essentially there's like technology that you can build up and get special benefits from. You can build a wonder. It's a fun little drafting game, but I got to play the 2-player version of this that came out a few years later. So Seven Wonders Duel came out in 2015. I think Antoine Bauza was the designer of the original Seven Wonders, but he co-designed this with Bruno Cathala, I always enjoy his designs. He's done games like Five Tribes is one of my favorite of his, and Jamaica is another great game. They did a really clever thing here by making it a 2-player game because, a drafting game doesn't work for 2 players typically. It's not much fun to have a handful of cards and just pass them back and forth. So they did this by having a tableau of cards that are on the table. The first round is built in a pyramid where you've got one face-up card at the top and then two face-down underneath it and three face-up underneath that. And essentially, people can only buy the cards that are visible. So if you buy a card at the bottom and it exposes the card right above it, you flip it over, and then that card's available to people. So you've got a really fun decision to say, like, well, if I buy this card, which is good for me and would be good for my opponent, then I'm going to open up a card that's even better for them. So really fun way to handle that same civilization building mechanism where you're kind of chaining these cards off each other, but restricting what cards are available to it. I really like this game. Me and my friend played it, and then we immediately wanted to play it a second time. Really fun way to implement this game. So if you guys are looking for a fun 2-player game, I definitely recommend Seven Wonders Duel. We're a little late to the party here, but it's still an excellent game.
I've heard so many good things about that game, but I have never had a chance to play.
Well, it's in my collection now. It was gifted to me for Father's Day. So if you get back out here for
Very
another
nice.
time, Adam, we'll have to give it a shot.
Hey, what was the game you showed with chameleons on it? Is it Chameleon?
Oh yeah. So the last one I'll mention, and then Steve can wrap us up here. But it's a game called Coloretto.
Oh yeah.
And I'd heard about this game for a while. I think Board Game Barrage talks about it. It's been one that they've mentioned several times. I didn't really know what to expect. I thought it was some kind of card game or tile drafting game, but my friends had it. They said they enjoy it, so we gave it a shot. It is a very simple card game. This game is actually really great for a filler game. It's a lot of player interaction. Basically, for the number of players you have at the table, you put out that number of central marketplace cards in front of you. So if you're playing 3 players, you put 3 cards out in front of you. And then this deck is just a whole bunch of, I think it's 7 different colors of chameleons. And so essentially what's going to happen is that you're trying to build sets of chameleons. And the bigger set that you have, the more it's worth scoring at the end of the game. On your turn, you draw a card off the top of the deck and you put it on one of those marketplaces. Or at any time you can take one of those marketplaces, but then you're out for the round. So let's say that I've got a red chameleon in my tableau and I want more red chameleons. So the first card I draw off the top of the deck is a red chameleon. I put it in one of the marketplaces out there and hope that nobody else takes it. But then Courtney takes a chameleon off the top of the deck and it's brown and she puts it there. Now, if I take that, I've got to take the red and the brown chameleon, which doesn't sound bad, except that you can only score 3 colors of chameleons positive at the end of the game. Everything else is negative points for you. Once you've kind of settled on the 3 colors you're building towards, you don't want the other colors. And so it makes it a really fun puzzle. Like, ooh, I want these 2 colors, so I'm going to build these 2 together. But then someone else puts a color that I don't want on top of there. Or somebody else is going to grab those 2 colors up. So you're just constantly like, oh, I hope this comes back to me. Oh, they just ruined that. They just trashed that pile for me. And you're always just like messing with other people and trying to screw up what they can score on and grab the best stuff that you can. So really fun for what it is. Takes about 15 minutes to play through a game. But we had a blast playing it. We played it like half a dozen times this weekend. Steve, you had something else?
I've actually had a pretty busy month, but yes, I will wrap up with Blokus Duo. I know it's an old game, but the bar next door that I go to regularly has opened up their bar seating for vaccinated individuals. So I've been playing Blokus Duo with some of the bartenders there when they're not busy serving people, and it's garnered a lot of interest from the other patrons. And I think we might be playing some board games there soon.
Now, did the bar have Blokus Duo, or did you bring it to the bar?
I brought it down.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, because I figured that was like, it wouldn't, even if somebody spills a beer or whatever, it's just plastic pieces. There was probably some card games that might be better for specifically 2 players, but I figured that was a bar-worthy game. The little pieces will probably get lost eventually. But
if any listeners don't know what Blokus is, so Blokus is basically this plastic tray, and you have a whole bunch of Tetris-like pieces, and the idea is that each player has to start on one corner of the board. They have to place a piece in a diagonal space connected to their current piece, but it can't be orthogonally connected. So you're kind of building it up across the board and trying to block what other people can do. Because those players can build next to you, but you can kind of get in their way. And you're trying to get as many of your pieces on the board until the board's filled before the other person does. And whoever has the least pieces left at the end of the game wins. But the traditional version is a 4-player only game. Or they have some variants, you can do other stuff, but it really is made for 4 players. So, Steve, how does Blokus Duo play differently? Is it just a smaller board, or are there different rules for it?
Blokus Duo is essentially just a smaller board and a specific subset of the piece combinations, right? They're designed to fit that size board. Essentially, it's the exact same rules as the full player Blokus, My favorite Blokus is Blokus Trigon, which is the 3-player Blokus, but 2-player is great also.
I've heard so many good things about Blokus going back to like, I don't know when it was, 2007 or whatever. This game looks cool. The little shapes going across, transparent pieces. He's perfect to bring down to a bar and make some new friends and start your own little board game group there at the pub. Nice.
Yeah, I think the biggest downside to Blokus is that you have to have a different version depending on how many people you're playing with. Is there a Blocko Pentagon? Blokus Pentagon?
Septablokus.
5 for 5 players. All right, well, nice. All right, sounds good. Well, I think that will wrap us up for this week. If you have any interest in chatting with us about the games we've been playing, you can reach out to us on social media. You can hit us up on Twitter at BG_hot takes, and you can reach out to us on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes. And by the way, we chatted about a poll at the beginning of the episode. We're going to start doing that weekly. So if you want to get engaged in the conversation and be a part of the poll results that we discuss at the beginning of every episode, follow us on Twitter, get in, give us your thoughts and why you're voting a certain way, and we'll read some of your information online. All right, until next week, take care, everybody.
Later.
Bye-bye.